Let's hit the reset button on all of this. We know what we've been talking about with conference realignment. We know Texas and Oklahoma are going to the SEC. All that is sort of, in one way, in the rearview mirror, and in another way, it's still on the horizon because they're not officially there yet. But we know all that. So I'm not going to take tonight and restate the obvious. So let's dive in here. Conference realignment, the future of college football, expanded playoff, why not? Throw it in there. All-encompassing. What does this mean? You know, when we talk about this stuff, as we have a great deal lately, it elicits a very wide range of emotions. I have observed there are really kind of 4 different compartments you could fit into. Compartment number 1 is the all change is good crowd. And anyone who argues you're just anti-progress, confusing change and progress all the time. Compartment number 2 is I'm okay with change, but it's just a case-by-case basis. And in this case, I'm cool with the change. Let's realign these conferences. Let's go wherever it's going to take us. There's a third group of people, and those people are also okay with change on a case-by-case basis, but they're not on board with these particular changes. That's where yours truly resides. And then group 4 is just take me back to leather helmets. Most of you fit into one of those compartments. And I have noticed that a lot of you are in compartment 1 or compartment 2. And so there's a funny thing that I have observed happening from the compartment 1 and 2 crowd towards the compartment 3 crowd. Now, the leather helmet crowd, that's a little bit different. But those of you who are all about any kind of change in college football, or those of you who are careful towards change, but you're on board with this particular version of it, you've tended to look at those of us in group 3 who are resistant to a lot of what's happening right now for the sake of, as we would tell you, the betterment of college football and preserving the tradition of college football. And you look at it and you make fun of it the same way you would your grandpa's teeth falling into a bowl of porridge. And that's not always the way it is. I don't think it is the way it is right now. Having set the framework, this week, Kirk Herbstreit goes on SportsCenter as all of this is unfolding. And he goes on SportsCenter and he says, I've got the quote here, actually. You know what? Let me pull it up. There we go. So Kirk Herbstreit does a SportsCenter hit this week amidst all the conference realignment chaos. And he says, and I quote, I hate losing the tradition of the sport. I've always been, I guess, naive to it. I've tried to be the guy who thinks people care about tradition and rivalries. Clearly, the decision makers don't. It's an arms race and it's all about money. You've probably heard several people talk like that. Me, chief among them. I feel the exact same way Kirk Herbstreit does about this and said as much publicly this week. And here's the response you get. The like-minded among you just cheer it on. But the ones in group 1 and 2, the ones who are all about change, or either they're somewhat all about change, but they're on board with this, they tend to make statements that are almost demeaning in nature. And I know good and well if you've been paying attention, you've watched this. If you're against these changes in college football, there's a certain portion of what I call the college football public that's out there that would almost assume an intellectual high ground on you, even though they don't hold it. And they assume the intellectual high ground by saying stuff like, you better get ready for it because it's coming whether you like it or not, which is essentially the equivalent of standing on the Titanic as it's going down. I like to think one dude amongst all of the thousands there that night stood there and looked at everyone panicked, looking for a spot on a lifeboat or a wayward table somewhere, and they just laughed at him and said, y'all better get used to the idea this thing's sinking because it's going down. Yeah, it was. You don't have to be happy about it. You don't have to cheer it on. Like, I think everyone with sane mind can see the changes happening there, and in a more subtle, but also in our own way, radical concept in college football. There is a complete changing of the tide here. Everyone can see it. Everyone understands what it's about. You're not breaking any new news to me when you tell me this is about money. This is about power and consolidating it. Everyone gets that, man. We've gone through third grade economics. We've watched the movie Wall Street. Everyone understands how it works. We aren't on board with it is the only difference, at least those of us who think like that. And as I kind of summed it up the other day, it's not ignoring the realities of life to push back against the changes that are happening, some of which at least right now in college football. It's not ignoring the realities of life to push back on money being the key driver at the forefront of seemingly every decision. As I said the other day, I get how that works. Someone like Kirk Herbstreit, when he goes on SportsCenter and says, I want to be naive. I want to think it's about tradition and the rivalries and the pageantry and maintaining the fabric of this sport, this one American sport that's different than all the rest. Folks like that aren't ignorant. I'm not ignorant to this. He's not ignorant to that. We get it, just don't like it. It's the preserve mentality. As I told you, again, in the entire city, if you will, of American sports over the last several decades, we've had the preserve in place. We've had the checks, we've had the balances, we've had the mechanisms in place that preserve college football relative to the direction pretty much every American sport has gone. Not perfectly, not even close to perfectly, but perfect enough for us to still appreciate it. And then all of a sudden, you watch it start to be eroded away, and you watch that preserve start to be torn down, and that's all that's ever kept it from being unique and what we love. It's not ignorance to look and say, boy, I hate that this is happening. It's just an appreciation for something, and it's a passion for something. Loving the tradition and pageantry of college football is not a bad thing. And just because you push back against someone trying to take a sledgehammer to it, that's not a bad thing. You also don't have to demonize the people that are responsible for the change because, again, if you could see the whole iceberg, for all I know, I'd be making the same decisions they were. So it sounds kind of hypocritical when you speak out of one side of your mouth, I'm speaking about me here, and you say, I wish we could maintain everything that we love about this, but then I also say out of the other side of my mouth, maybe I'd do the same thing if I were Greg Sankey. It's hypocritical if he has a bunch of options, or if I had a bunch of options, if I were in his position. I don't know the whole story. I am smart enough to say I don't know. Know when you don't know and be able to say it. If he has a bunch of options and Greg Sankey is sitting there and he's got multiple switches in front of him and he's pushing the death switch for college football, that's one thing. But if he understands the full picture and he sees things and has scope and breadth that we can't have and understands there is an inevitability here, I have to position my conference in its best interest moving forward. That's another thing, which kind of brings me to what's about to happen. So we know what's already happened. There is a thought out there that it's just inevitable. At this point, the SEC is going through a 30-team super conference. Well, no, it's not. It's not inevitable. Here's how I know. If they wanted to, they could do it by daybreak tomorrow. They could pull the lever if they wanted to, and they could bring, you would be shocked at who they could bring on board by this time tomorrow if they wanted to. What I believe Greg Sankey is doing, you're looking at pictures of him right here, is I believe he understands they had the power in the SEC to take preemptive measures to best position themselves for the long game. I'm not discounting that it's a possibility that 30-team super conference scenario is where we end up. What I am confidently telling you is I don't think they've made any kind of decision. Oftentimes, when you're watching these huge arcing decisions play out, there's this mentality that there's a grand master plan and everything's already mapped out 10 years, 15 years, 20 years down the road, and they're just going by the schematic. And if you've ever run an organization, if you've ever planned a multi-leveled operation even, if you've built a house, if you've planned a road trip, you know how it works. Really what happens is you plan the first few steps, but there's a point on there where you put down the pen, and you pick up the pencil and you start gently mapping out the rest and you leave room to adjust because you know there are a lot of variables out there that even if you have 50,000-foot perspective, you could not possibly see. That's where Sankey is, and he's got the best seat in the house right now. It's not inevitable that the SEC goes anywhere past 16. It's possible, which means nothing more than he's done exactly what he's supposed to do, given the landscape shifting, and that's position his conference. Okay, I'm not running a Greg Sankey fan club. I'm just also not lining up outside his home with torches and pitchforks quite yet. But the question's not about the SEC at the moment to me. The question's about the Big Ten. The Big Ten, whether they know it or not, is the next big player in the room. And Fox is the next big player in the room. And there's a lot of unrest in both neighborhoods tonight. But it doesn't have to be that way because they got a lot of cachet and they got a lot of sway moving forward. But the question, unlike the SEC and the Big Ten, is who's really driving the bus? I don't think you're ready to look at me and say Kevin Warren. I don't think anyone up there is comfortable saying that, nor do I think it would be reality. I think there are probably a few influential figures that are going to have to be in lockstep agreement. Now, the reason I have trepidation, if I'm looking out for the Big Ten's best interest right now, is I remember the last time these people tried to operate in lockstep agreement, and it was one of the biggest public catastrophes that you'll ever see from a PR perspective. It was, what about this time last year as I look at the imaginary watch, and all they had to do was get on board with messaging as to why they were postponing a season. They couldn't even do that. All they had to do is get on board with how a vote turned out. They couldn't even do that. Imagine trying to restructure your conference. Imagine trying to add member institutions. Imagine also, maybe unlike the SEC, trying to juggle the prioritization of athletics and academics. And one side wants it weighted 80-20 this way, and another side wants it weighted 80-20 that way. Then you understand what we call the classic conundrum that the Big Ten could be in. I really hope they make a move. It was awful quiet up there. I got a text last night that I just tweeted out verbatim from someone who would know a lot more than me. They said, it's awful quiet up here. They put the winky emoji. I didn't include that. I didn't want to be weird. But that's where the Big Ten stands. But then also, that's not all that's out there, is it? I haven't even mentioned the ACC. I haven't even mentioned the Pac-12. I certainly haven't mentioned the American, which I think quietly is sneaking around in the tall grass, about as ready to pounce relative to what their normal position has been in the sport as anyone is. But I think the lingering question, it's not going to get answered this week or this year for conferences like the Pac-12. I really loved what the commissioner out there, the new commissioner, said. Now, I haven't learned to pronounce his last name, but that doesn't mean I don't like what he said out there. He was very clear in his messaging. If you haven't, and judging by the numbers, most of you haven't, gone and watched Pac-12 Media Day, go and watch his introductory press conference and listen to how clear he was. It was crystal clear, the vision. He wasn't scared to prioritize football. He wasn't scared to say, we've got to make it a point to emphasize football. It's not like we're going to give the middle finger to all the other Olympic sports out here, but we got to be clear about what drives the bus. He also was very clear in saying, we got to do everything we can to get our teams in the playoff, even though some of the measures I may not agree with. I also think they're going to turn the scheduling model upside down out there. Anyway, what I'm saying is, I think a lot of the new initiatives and the new mentality in the Pac-12 is good. Could it be coming at a worse time? No. But if they can survive and stave off fundamental alterations to the conference, the long game here is waiting for new media players to come to the table. See, right now, you read work over on any of several websites, and all the talk is about ESPN makes their move, Fox makes a counter move, and maybe there's another network in there somewhere. But the thing that you're watching for in that maybe and then the blank is for a name to pop up that's not on the tip of anyone's tongue. Could be one of the streaming giants. You know, what Amazon is today for you when it comes to football is not going to be what they are in 2026. Likewise, with any of a number of other streaming giants. And you never know what merger happens between now and then. And so you never know what the platform looks like and what the landscape looks like. But just like Greg Sankey did with his league, you have to take it upon yourself and be aggressive in doing so to get positioned in the best possible manner you can so that you benefit. Because what you don't want to do is get to 2026 and as opposed to just an A-B scenario, you got A, B, C, and D as options out there. And all of a sudden, there's a massive infusion of cash into the media market, but you've already folded up shop. That's what the Big 12 is probably on the precipice of, unfortunately, having no option other than to do. The Pac-12 is a little bit better off currently. The ACC certainly is, but you just got to get yourself in position. So there's still a lot of unknown. I'd be lying, as would anyone else, if they came on air and said, I got this down to a T. Here's the way it's going to happen. Exciting times, frustrating times, concerning times, but interesting times nonetheless.